everyone. Welcome to community call number 33 with EthStaker. From EthStaker, we've got Superfizz, we've got Embeddika, Nolan, Remy, and I'm Nix. We are hosting Rocket Pool today. Rocket Pool is coming out with a new upgrade right after Chapella, so we are going to talk about that. Do you guys want to introduce yourselves?
Sounds good. I can go first. Hi everyone, I'm Mav. I do a lot of things at Rocket Pool, but none of it's very technical. So thankfully, I've got Joe along here, who's one of the gigabrains who helps to build the Rocket Pool protocol. But yeah, you'll probably find me floating around on Discord or Twitter, marketing and community manager. And great to be here. Thanks to EthStaker for hosting us. We're really excited about this upgrade. It's a big deal, and we think it's going to go quite a long way to improving our ability to help keep Ethereum decentralized.
Yeah, we're really excited about Rocket Pool updates that have come out recently. Do you want to really quickly talk about what happened last week with the deposit pool?
Last week, yeah, that is a good point. There's been a lot happening, that's for sure. So as part of the preparation work for the upgrade, maybe Joe can add a little bit more with regards to the technical details, but there's this thing called the deposit pool. And right now, there's a lot of demand for liquid staking. People are depositing ETH with Rocket Pool to mint our ETH, liquid staking token, as we now call them. So Atlas will shift the balance. There's going to be a lot more capacity to mint additional ETH because there's going to be a lot more capacity to spin up new mini pool validators. So as a result, the protocol DAO, which is a DAO that helps to provide some direction to where Rocket Pool is heading, made up of all the node operators, they signaled that they wanted to increase the size of this pool where the ETH sits before it gets staked. And that kind of gives us a bit of a head start. It's just a small one. We expect a lot of demand to be coming in, but that pool was increased by 13,000 ETH and it filled up in about 12 hours. So pretty impressive performance. I think it's over twice as much ETH as our previous biggest day of deposits. And I think a good sign that there is demand there for decentralized liquid staking, and that Chapella and then Atlas a few days later is going to be a pretty exciting time for Rocket Pool.
That's super exciting that it went so quickly. Just for anyone who maybe is joining the call in the future who doesn't know what Rocket Pool is, can you give like a very quick overview, a little 30-second soundbite? What is Rocket Pool?
All right, I'll try. So Rocket Pool is Ethereum's most decentralized staking protocol. As of today, we're the only permissionless protocol, which means that anyone can join and be a node operator. As of last night, there were just over 2,200 node operators. So pretty good going. We expect that number to increase post Chapella. What we're here to talk about is the Atlas upgrade. And a big part of that is lowering the barrier of entry to spin up a mini pool validator, as we call them here at Rocket Pool. Today, the ETH requirement to do so is just 16 with Rocket Pool, and Atlas will drop that to 8 ETH. There's also an RPL token requirement, but perhaps we can get into that in a little bit more detail later on. There's a suite of tools that also makes Rocket Pool easier to use. Everything from this the smart node stack software that Joe helps to build through to the smoothing pool, which helps to deliver a more consistent stream of rewards for the work that node operators do. Then there's also the rescue node, which has been created by our pretty incredible community, and a Rocket Arb facility that helps to pay a small bonus, if you like, to people setting up new mini pools. So a lot of exciting stuff going on. It's not just staking, lowering the barrier to entry with that lower ETH amount. There's a lot more things that Rocket Pool can boast as well.
If I can bust in, I love to look for evidence of healthy communities, and sometimes that can be hard to find, like globally. But evidence of healthy communities, one of those evidences are when members of the community create their own tools to support a product or a project. And so these things like Ramana's Rocket Arb, the rescue node created by, oh my gosh, tell me who did it. They deserve credit.
It was
Patches?
Pope Ash and Patches and a couple others.
Yeah, Pope Ash Patches. Yeah. So, and I even that with Joe. Joe is a Rocket Pool developer, but he also on the side creates this. My mind is not firing today, but he creates the Proteus developed on the Rock 5B, which is a staking platform that you can use for Rocket Pool. And all of that to say, as you're looking for healthy communities, as you're evaluating products and you're like, is this something that I want to get involved with? You should be looking for evidence that the community is creating things to support the project. And Rocket Pool is one of those places where you can see so much evidence of the community like just building together. And those are 3 examples, but as I'm talking, I'm like, oh, and there's this one and there's that one. There are just so many great tools. So I love that evidence of a healthy community.
Can we call Rocket Pool Ethereum's lead node operator provider? Nobody provides.
I don't think it'd be. Oh yeah. So there are so many disambiguations here. Like you can phrase anything you want to make it sound like what you want, right? And so we know that currently Rocket Pool runs about 2.5% of the validators, which in my mind makes it a crazy underdog. But while they're running 2.5% of the validators, are they running like 25% of the nodes? And so anyone who's like, if you believe in Ethereum, if you want to contribute to decentralization, then there's a reason that I talk about Rocket Pool so much. There's a reason that so many people can't shut up about it. And it's because it is the thing that is promoting the most decentralization within the Ethereum ecosystem. So it's at a point where even though it's 2.5%, it cannot be ignored as the node running juggernaut.
Yeah. So let's get into what today's about. So Rocket Pool is a service where you can deposit 16 ETH and run a validator with just 16 ETH, which is only half of the 32 ETH requirement. It pulls it in. What is the Atlas upgrade and how does this change how Rocket Pool operates?
So Atlas is coming in just over 10 days, midnight UTC, so a few days after Chapella. And it really, the core mechanic of Rocket Pool is matching up 2 sides of demand. We've talked a little bit about the node operator side, and there's also the liquid staking side, right? So certainly when it comes to liquid staking, I would say that Rocket Pool is kind of the leading provider of decentralized liquid staking. Obviously, you can run a node yourself with 32 ETH, but there's kind of no way to natively liquid stake, as it were. And part of what Rocket Pool, I guess, is challenged by is matching up demand from those 2 sides. You could have a case where everyone wants to run a node, but there's no one willing to contribute liquid staking deposit, or vice versa. Right now, today, we're in a situation where there is a huge demand for liquid staking, and our node operators have a lot of their own ETH tied up as collateral. It's not being put to work very efficiently, and Atlas helps to address that. So from this balance of half and half, as it were, 16 ETH from a node operator, 16 ETH from a liquid staker, that's being adjusted to 8 ETH coming from the node operator, and that frees up obviously 32 minus 8, 24 ETH from liquid staking deposits. So you can probably see how that change in the ratio opens up a whole lot of capacity for our node operators to support the minting of new RETH, the liquid staking token of Rocket Pool. So if you had 16 ETH in the past, you could run 1 mini pool validator. Now you can split that into 2 and run 2 8 ETH mini pool validators. the liquid staking deposits that you would support would increase from 16 to 24 plus 24, 48. So it's quite a big jump, 3 times the amount of liquid staking deposits can be supported by the current amount of node operators. And of course, in addition to that, there's some people who the 16 ETH barrier to entry might still be too high, but they're willing to help out with just 8. So we expect to see an increase in the number of node operators as well, on top of the increased efficiency. So you might be able to understand why we're so excited, why it's such a big deal. It's something we've been working towards for a little while now. Maybe Joe can add a few more details on the technical side, but certainly something that Rocket Pool prides itself in is being cautious, having a security first approach when it comes to these upgrades, starting out with the 16-16 split, seeing how that performs over time with the help of our community, carrying out some research to see, is it safe, is it appropriate, how should we go about shifting this balance. We expect to see the pendulum swing back the other way for a little while, as it were. So there will be a lot of new mini pools wanting to be spun up. And at the same time, we're taking steps to ensure that there's demand for our ETH. Quite popular to use liquid staking tokens in DeFi these days. So we need to make sure that the protocol still remains balanced, as it were.
Yeah, I'll tack on to that, Mav. So I'm Joe, by the way. I built the smart node stack, the software that people actually use to interface with our contracts and the execution layer and the beacon chain, like the software that you actually install on your machine. And I do a couple other things. I wear a lot of hats around the protocol as well. But to comment, to piggyback off of what Atlas brings, I would say another thing that's probably pretty important is it brings support for Chapella. Right, the idea that now node operators can actually get skimmed rewards from the beacon chain, so they don't have to exit their validators to access that capital. They can get it sort of every so often, every couple of days or so. Atlas adds the ability to access that skimmed ether in your mini pools, so you can regularly get your access to your rewards without having to exit the entire thing. So the previous version of Rocket Pool, Redstone, had support for withdrawals because it was in the original spec, but you had to exit the entire thing to get access to it. Now with Atlas, you can get access to the skimmed rewards because we know what that looks like. There's a couple little quality of life changes, but I think those are the big ones for sure.
Can I ask something?
Sure.
So it's a Lindy time question. So we know, Redstone launched, or well, the current contracts, they're over a year old. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so
Well,
Atlas is going to bring,
yes.
yeah. But in general, I would say the protocol is over a year old. Is that would you call that fair? And so Atlas is going to bring significant changes to the platform and the smart contracts, mostly upgrades. And so my question is about Lindy time. And if people don't know what Lindy time is, it's this idea that the longer something works, the longer it's likely to work. So if I have a clock that's been running for a year, I have a good belief it's going to run tomorrow too. But if it's been running one day, then I really may not have those same assumptions. So my question is, to what extent does Atlas reset the Lindy time for Rocket Pool smart contracts?
So I think it depends on what facet you're looking at as far as the protocol goes. Atlas upgrades some of the contracts, but not all of the contracts. So some of them will still be in their original vanilla launched in November of 2021 state or whatever. And those contracts have basically withstood the test of time thus far. So things like the Vault contract, for example, which is where all of the protocols like Ether and RPL live before they're distributed out, that hasn't changed. I don't think that's going to change. So that has certainly been, we'll say, that'll pass the test, the Lindy test, as far as being hardened for a year or so and proven, that kind of thing. Things that will change are, for example, I mentioned being able to access your skimmed rewards as a node operator. that means we have to push a new delegate for the mini pool contracts. So every validator has a backing contract on the execution layer that acts as the withdrawal credentials, right? With the new 0x01 based stuff. Every validator has a unique withdrawal credential, a unique mini pool contract. But the mini pool contract by itself doesn't have a lot of functionality in it. It's pretty bare bones. And all of the mini pools combined kind of go towards a single contract called the delegate, which has the bulk of the features for the mini pools. And that is a new thing we're doing in Atlas, or rather, we are pushing a new version of the delegates that the mini pools use so that you can have things like skimmed rewards. You can get access to those. The old mini pool delegate doesn't know about skimmed rewards, doesn't know how to provide them. The new one does. And so that would be something that would get reset in this case, where you would have to maybe wait a little longer to make sure that it is battle hardened, and you wait as long as you do before accessing your skimmed rewards or anything. I should mention that mini pool upgrades for the delegates are voluntary. They have to be done on a per mini pool basis, and the node operator is in charge of deciding which one they point to. So the protocol can't rug you by force changing your delegates and making you do something you don't want to do, right? So it's always up to you. So for example, if you are concerned about the Lindy effect in this case, you can simply just wait to upgrade until you're satisfied. And it seems like it's stood the test of time. So there are a couple of things that have changed, but not all of them.
I was saying 6 months for the original launch, 6 months of Lindy time before I'm comfortable saying, yeah, it's robust. Do you think, and I know, your rocket pool, so what you say has to be taken with a grain of salt, and that's fair and all. Would you say like a month or 3 months? Because I wouldn't guess. I mean,
so again, that depends on who you are. If you're a liquid
your risk
staker,
profile. Yeah.
If you're a liquid staker, not much has really changed from your perspective. So I
That's
think, yeah, being able to just go onto the website and swap for RETH or anything like that, that hasn't really changed. That whole process, the backing stuff behind it. I mean, some of the backing stuff has a little bit, but for the most part, it's still the same. So you should be satisfied with that. From the node operator's perspective, things have changed. Like I mentioned, the skimming and the ability to change your delegate and stuff like that. So if you're waiting 1 to 3 months or so for safety, you may want to hold off on doing that upgrade. And in the meantime, your balance isn't going anywhere, right? It's still pooling in the mini pool. It's still going to be there, just whenever you're comfortable accessing it, that kind of stuff. But yeah, it depends on where you sit in the ecosystem.
Yeah, thank you.
So you guys are calling these LEB8s. What does that mean? Why are they called LEB8s?
So so let me take a step back and say the community as a whole has been assessing this entire thing, this concept, since like last July or something. That's when we first got the idea, and we were kind of playing around with it and figuring, can we go lower than 16 as sort of a natural way to scale? And the community did a lot of math, a lot of research, a lot of statistics, like real hardcore academic stuff to decide this. And when we were playing with the original idea of taking things lower than 16, LEB came out of that is a phrasing for lower ETH bond. That's what LEB stands for. And that just means a node operator bonds less than 16 Ether, the canonical amount right now, to create a validator. And a lot of the study was around how low can we go and still have the same security posture that we have today. So if somebody were to use Rocket Pool to attack the protocol, they would still be slashed for an amount, like a meaningful amount. Basically what they came up with was 16 is way too much. Like you're never going to see someone attack the protocol for that much and get slashed for that much. It's just not feasible. I mean, on paper it's fine, but in real life it doesn't work like that. And they come up with essentially 8 plus a supplemental RPL bond is sufficient to cover all of the reasonable attack vectors you would see in real life. But LEB's lower ETH bond 8.
Do you see it going below 8 anytime soon?
So based on the research, the real problem there is 8's a comfortable number as far as that attack goes, being slashed for that amount. Lower than that starts to get into the maybe it's not quite enough territory, especially with some of these really large, we call them Hail Mary MEV blocks, where they have rewards of like 50 Ether, 100 Ether, something like that. They are rare, admittedly, but they do exist. And so we have to kind of keep those in mind when we're evaluating how low we can actually go. I think we're comfortable with 8 right now, and we want to see what happens with it. So Mav mentioned that the protocol is very slow moving because it's very cautious. It's very conservative when it comes to these massive changes and stuff. And 8 was certainly a significant change. I think they want to watch how 8 works and see how things scale and see if it's sufficient. We could provisionally go lower. And I know some of the community is researching that. Valdorf in particular just posted some research on 4, for example, like how secure could LEB 4s be? And the answer is not very without some underlying assumptions and things. But we're looking at some options as far as supplementing that collateral, some options as far as boosting the security. So for example, one of the things that has been rumored a little bit that we're talking about is the ability to force exit a validator using the smart contract credentials on the execution layer, right? Something like basically you'd have the mini pool contract that quote unquote owns the validator on the beacon chain, send a message to some queue that says, I want to exit this validator. So if we had that, we might be able to go a little bit lower. I'm not sure how much lower. I know it's definitely something we're investigating, but we're still very much in the air as far as the research goes. And we want to see how 8 plays out first.
So explain like I'm 5. Why does a high MEV block make a lower bond more dangerous?
So it comes down to statistics basically of how high the block can be and how likely it is. You kind of multiply those together to get the expected value. And the problem with large blocks is if somebody sees that they have a proposal incoming and they see that the proposal they've been given or the block they can generate has a significant fraction of extractable value of MEV or tips or whatever, they can change the credentials that they use, the fee recipient, if you will, basically where those tips get put. Right now, they have to belong either to the node's fee distributor contract, which splits things evenly with the RETH holders, or Rocket Pool's smoothing pool, which is basically just a big old pile that all of those tips go into, and then it distributes them evenly at the end of the interval every 28 days. Someone could front run that. They could see, oh, I have a really big block coming up, and they can change those credentials to something else, something that they own, like an EOA or whatever. And that way they don't have to split the rewards with the pool stakers that gave, half or 3/4 of the capital to spin up that validator in the first place. And if they're not sharing it, that's kind of a problem because Rocket Pool is built on the assumption that all of the rewards will get split evenly minus commission between the node operator and the pool stakers. And suddenly the pool stakers have been robbed of that money, which is bad, right? That's why we have to make sure that there is sufficient capital, they have sufficient skin in the game so that if something like that were to happen, we can pull that collateral, we can pull that back and at least semi make the pool whole again, depending on the size of that reward. But it comes down to how big do these MEV blocks have to be before someone thinks it's not worth it to try to cheat the system in that way. And 8 is a good number. We don't see a lot of those blocks that are the higher rewards than 8. After that, you start getting into scary territory where they become a little bit more common. You start seeing like 4 or 5 Ether MEV blocks every so often, and we have to start reevaluating, like maybe it's not enough collateral to prevent someone cheating in that respect. Does that make sense?
I've always called myself the Beacon Chain Health Consultant, and that's a made-up title. It means nothing. But when we look at these fractional staking platforms, 16 feels very comfortable to me. But I also recognize that it doesn't allow enough liquid staking token development, and so I recognize the value of LEB8s, and I think that I'm hopeful and comfortable that that's the sweet spot for home stakers to really participate in Rocket Pool and provide a lot of liquid staking token overhead with 24 ETH. But when you start talking about lower than 8 ETH, it really makes me, from the Beacon Chain Health perspective, it really makes me nervous. So yeah. I really feel good about this LEB8. And to be honest, I wasn't comfortable with even that at first, and it did grow on me. And I do think it's a good move.
So yeah. To be clear, though, dropping below that 8 ETH for any protocol would present a threat to the people who are in that protocol and that protocol itself. It doesn't present a threat to the beacon chain, correct?
So unless you're like a massive state actor that can basically use this sort of like leveraging situation to create enough validators that you can take over 34% of the network, then it's not really a threat to the beacon chain. And if that were to happen, then we have bigger problems, right?
From a systems perspective, 32 Ether as a stake was established to secure the beacon chain against attackers. And if every time we have like, a protocol like Rocket Pool and they reduce that number and enable people to stake with less, they have less at stake. And so if I were a powerful actor, I could set up thousands of these LEB8s and basically quadruple my attack power. And so that's the kind of where the rubber hits the road, and we want to balance attack surface with the need for people to stake with liquid tokens. And I with that fear in mind, I do think Rocket Pool is the platform that is seeking to strike that balance rather than empowering evil actors.
So let me before we get into because I know someone's going to clip this out of context and it's going to be something that comes out. So let me just highlight one thing, which is the community of Rocket Pool itself has voted almost unanimously that the protocol will limit itself in the interest of the beacon chain, so that Rocket Pool as a whole doesn't have any more than X amount of validators, where X is some number well below that 30% problem area, right? I think it's like 20 or 22 or 25 or whatever, something like that. And the team has the ability right now, we have the ability to turn off deposits, to turn off new mini pools. So we used that ability back when we first launched to do this whole staged launch approach where we had like 10 mini pools and then 30 and then 60, and then we finally opened it up to the general public. So if it ever got to a situation where Rocket Pool was large enough that it would become a threat to the beacon chain, we would just simply turn deposits off. Be like, nope, pool's closed. We can't do anymore. Sorry, guys. And that would be that. So I'm not really
Which
worried
is so
about
funny.
that as an attack vector.
Other protocols are like, we launched this, but we don't have any control over it. So if it grows to 100% of the network, it's not our fault. And I'm like, whoa. You don't unleash something and act like you don't have control over what you've unleashed. These are immutable smart contracts, but you're responsible for what you're doing to the network. So anyway, sorry.
Is there anywhere that people can publicly see the calculations that led to 8 ETH mini pools?
So almost all of our stuff is done in one of two places. It's either done on our Discord server for active kind of real-time communication and things. And then on our DAO forum, we've got a forum as well that for longer lived content like this. And I believe it lives in both places. It's dao.rocketpool.net is the forum. If you go there and I don't have the link on me, obviously, but if you go through and you look for it, I'm sure you can find all the math and the research and the papers and things that have been published on LEB8s and their security and their relevant position in the network and stuff. Yeah, it's all out there.
Cool. So I'm interested in staking. You guys have convinced me. Can I set up an LEB8 from scratch? Do I need to have a 16 ETH? If I do already have a 16 ETH mini pool, can I convert?
Mav, you want to cover this? It's been a while since we got there.
Cover this.
Go for it.
Briefly. Yeah. So either newly from scratch or converting over, both are options to set up a new LEB8 or an LEB8 mini pool. There is an RPL requirement. So currently with the 16 ETH mini pools, as well as 16 ETH, the node operator has to contribute 1.6 ETH worth of RPL. So the RPL requirement is denominated in ETH as well. When we move to 8 ETH mini pools, there will be a 2.4 ETH requirement on top of the 8 ETH. So assuming that that is met, people who are today operating with 16 ETH mini pools, they can convert across. And if you have 8 ETH plus 2.4 ETH worth of RPL sitting around, post Atlas, you will be able to launch a new one from scratch too. Part of what Joe's been working on is to make sure that that can be a seamless transition, because we know that there are people in different circumstances, whether they're running a node or they're waiting. We want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to launch. And we know that there may potentially be some delays post Chapella, not from anything that Rocket Pool is or isn't doing, but just in terms of congestion, whether that's existing nodes being spun down or new ones being spun up. Joe's worked on some ways to kind of skip the queue, as it were, to make sure that Rocket Pool can do as much as possible to capture some market share, to grow that percentage of staked ETH above the 2.5% or so where it is now. For people who have not run a node before, the smart node software that Joe helps to build, that we've referenced to, really helps to streamline that process. So it's possible today to spin up an 8 ETH mini pool on testnet. You can do that and not only get to know how Rocket Pool works in a safe and risk-free way, but also potentially, if you stumble across anything, help to kind of do some final beta testing before it goes live. There's been a ton of that from the community, as well as, of course, the audit process. So yeah, you can get involved today, but they won't officially launch until midnight UTC on the 18th of April.
Where do I find information about participating in the testnet?
Joe,
Sure,
do you wanna-
I'll take this one. So the smart node itself comes with a pretty comprehensive set of documentation that covers everything from how do I start a node, what are the requirements for starting a node, how do I secure it is definitely a thing, how do I provision the software, how do I pick a client for an execution client or consensus client, all that stuff is there in our documentation sites, docs.rocketpool.net. And it's identical between the testnet and the main network on mainnet, because functionally you're still doing the exact same thing. You're creating a machine, you're validating for it. The only difference is the Ether is fake and the RPL is fake, right? But that documentation site covers the whole process, start to finish, including how do you do this for practice on the test network. It's got some details about how to use we use Gorley and Prater for the test network. We used to have Zhejiang support, and that got pulled because it's not long for this world, right? They're going to basically can it as soon as Chapella goes live on mainnet. But how to use the test network, how to get the test Ether, how to get the test RPL, how to do all of those things to set it up and ensure that you are ready for prime time, so to speak.
I want to say, you guys have mentioned the smart node stack a few times, but if people are relatively new to Rocket Pool, I imagine most people here are already using the smart node stack and they're
One would
familiar.
hope.
Yeah, but if you're new, if you're interested in Rocket Pool, there's a thing that many people don't know. Rocket Pool is, I like to say, it's 20 times easier to set up a Rocket Pool node than it is to set up a solo node. And I say that in all honesty and really saying that I believe solo validating is the gold standard. However, setting up a Rocket Pool node in Minipool is 20 times easier. That's for two reasons. The first reason is the Rocket Pool documentation is extremely clean and well developed. And the second reason is that the Rocket Pool smart node stack takes you step by step with yes, no, thank you, goodbye, click yes, and you're staking. So with those two features, staking with Rocket Pool is wildly easier than setting a solo validator. And I will say that, and also truly believe that solo validating is the gold standard for staking. I can believe two things at one time.
Does that make us the platinum standard?
Whoa, we're gonna solo validating is as close as you can get to supporting the beacon chain in a vanilla way. There are no third-party conflicts there. You're not beholden to any smart contracts. Solo validating is and likely always will be the best way that you can stake for the beacon chain. Now, when it gets to like APR or providing LST tokens, Rocket Pool does have a lot of advantages, and it's the reason like I really love both of them. Yeah, sorry, ranting, all done.
Speaking of the smart node stack, Logic is asking which version we need to be on for the upgrade. 1.9.0.
Yeah, so we had a new major release. It was 1.0 that came out about a week ago or so, and that's the one that has support for Chapella. So all the clients are updated to be Sherpilla compatible on mainnet, and it also has support for the Atlas upgrade whenever that gets released. It is a fun hybrid that knows how to use the contracts as they are today and how they will be tomorrow. And it knows how to look for when they get upgraded and how to just switch over automatically. There was another update, 191, that came out not too long ago, but that is a very minor update, just fixes some things. And essentially that came out of our support channel, where people will come and engage with experts within our community about issues that they're having, troubleshooting, technical support, that kind of stuff. And some of them had some common problems as far as like their network setup or their machine setup goes, installing and provisioning the software. And so 191 is really meant for them because it provides more diagnostics if they encounter one of those failures, so that the guys in support have something more informative to look at and can kind of help support that easier without having to do the entire deep dive process of, okay, let's start from scratch, tear everything apart and figure out what's going on. So for the most part, you can ignore that, but any of the 1.9 series, you're good to go.
Cool. I just have kind of two more questions. This RPL collateral basically goes from 10% to like 30%.
So let me cover the technical details of that real quick. We had a community vote on how RPL collateral was going to work moving forward in the context of LEBs, of lower ether bonds, right? Both for the minimum and the maximum. This was probably one of the largest and I would say most contentious community debates that we've had in Rocket Pool. Most of them are pretty unanimous, but this one was very split. But what's ultimately the majority decided on was that from a collateral perspective, the minimum is 10% of the borrowed amount. So that is, in the case of a 16, it's 10% of 16 because you're borrowing 16. In the case of an LEB 8, it's 10% of the 24 that you're borrowing from the protocol to create the validator. So it would be 2.4 Ether worth of RPL. And then the maximum is 150% of the bonded amount, how much you put up as the node operator to stake in your mini pool. So in the case of a 16, again, 150% would be 24. And in the case of an LEB 8, it's 150% of the 8s that you put up, which is 12.
Interesting. So that window is much smaller. Aha, that's cool.
One window, but not for the same amount of ETH, right? If I have 16 ETH and I want to deploy this, too many pools, I am now at a maximum of 24.
If you have 16 ETH and you can make one 16 Ether mini pool for a maximum of 24,
or two
8s for a maximum of 24.
Right, exactly. But the minimum went up because I'm borrowing more.
The minimum went up because you're borrowing more. We need that supplemental collateral to protect against like MEV theft or whatever.
So
but the maximum has not changed. And that's
comparing my bonded ETH with 16 ETH or 8 ETH mini pools, then the minimum goes up and the max stays the same. But if I'm comparing just a mini pool, then it looks different. But then my bonded ETH is way lower. It's half.
That's right. I think it may be kind of worth pointing out, and I don't want to ruffle old feathers, but this does tend to favor smaller stakers because they can retain a higher proportion of the RPL rewards. If it went the other way and the max collateral increased, then people who have large sums of RPL would be able to take a higher proportion of the RPL rewards. So this does, regardless of how people feel about it, it does end up promoting smaller stakers. Is that a fair assessment?
I mean, one would hope. It maintains the status quo as far as that maximum goes. So like Yorick said, if you have a certain amount of Ether, the amount of RPL you can stake on top of that doesn't change. The minimum does, but the maximum doesn't. So if you have a lot of RPL, you can't get that to go even higher and thus pull more rewards than you would get today with the 16s.
If I am running a 16 ETH mini pool right now, I have the option to switch over to an 8 ETH mini pool. Two questions. Do I have to at some point switch over to an 8 ETH mini pool? Second question, can new operators after Atlas spinning up choose a 16 ETH mini pool, or do they have to choose an 8 ETH mini pool?
Sure, that's pretty straightforward. 16 is always on the table. It will remain always on the table. We have no plans to ever remove it from the table because we recognize that some people want to be able to stake with a smaller amount of RPL required. They don't want to put as much into it, right? So if you have a 16 now, there is no obligation to switch over to an 8 at any point in time. It's purely voluntary. You do it on your own volition whenever you want. You can keep a 16 until the end of days. That's fine with me. And once Atlas hits, you can continue to make 16s if you so choose. The smart node will ask you when you first create a new mini pool, how much do you want to bond? How much do you want to deposit to this guy? One of the options is 8, another one is 16, and you pick whatever you're comfortable with.
We have 2 questions from YouTube. Let's do them in order. So the first one is, I'm currently a solo validator, running a smart node stack in hybrid mode, and I'm planning on migrating my solo validator over. So we should probably talk about that. What is that thing, right? Is it still worth running hybrid, or should I just go native? So maybe we'll just first take, what is this solo validator migration thing that was just raised here?
Yeah, there's 2 questions there. Both of them are fairly large questions that could take up the rest of our time. So we'll have to be very careful how we answer them.
Crisp.
Yeah. Very briefly. So Atlas introduces the ability to take a existing validator on the beacon chain with the 0x00 BLS key based withdrawal credentials, like a classic solo validator, for example.
Right.
And it allows you to convert that directly into a rocket pool mini pool without having to exit and re-enter the chain. The validator stays as it is. The key for the validator stays as it is. Everything is the same. The only difference is basically the bookkeeping on the back end. That is a process that we do support directly in the smart node. There's a command for doing that. The documentation describes how to do it and things. Ultimately, what it comes down to is creating a new, what we call a vacant mini pool, which means a mini pool that is expecting you to do this migration process for an existing pub key on the beacon chain. And then you change the withdrawal credentials for that validator from the BLS-based 0x00 credentials over to the mini pool address. So one of the things Chappelle introduces in order to provide support for skimming and withdrawals is changing your withdrawal credential for your validator from the BLS-based one to a address on the execution layer. And so this is a one-time opportunity for everybody that is interested in taking advantage of this. You get one shot to basically change your solo stakers credentials from their traditional ones over to a mini pool address. And this, what he's talking about is basically this process where you create a special mini pool that knows to accept an incoming validator that already exists, and that becomes the new credentials. And so
I'm gonna ask a really dumb question. I know the answer, but it's
sure.
To ask the dumb question. So my solo validator has 32 of my ETH. Now it becomes a mini pool. Is this now a 32 bond mini pool? What is it? How does this work?
So when you do the conversion process, when you start it, I should highlight, as soon as you start it in the smart node with this creating of a vacant mini pool, the smart node is going to snapshot how much your balance looks at right now. And obviously you're not going to get skimmed because you haven't done the credentials change yet. So there's nowhere for the skimmed rewards to go. So it will snapshot what your balance is at the time. And that is your balance. That entire thing stays as yours. All of those rewards are yours and yours alone. They're not split and shared retroactively or anything like that. That's done with our refund system. I'm getting a little down into the weeds, so I'm going to ignore that. You can look at the documentation if you're curious. But once the snapshot happens and the mini pool goes through and you are given your share of the rewards, it basically starts with a clean slate and says, okay, you have everything that was on the beacon chain at the time you started this. We're going to start over. And from now on, you're going to split this with the EthStakers, and you have the option of either converting into a 16 Ether mini pool or an 8 Ether mini pool. The choice is yours when you start the conversion process. So your 32 ETH bonded validator becomes a 16 ETH mini pool or an 8 ETH mini pool. That's your choice.
With enough credentials to spin up, or enough credit to spin up another
enough credits, yeah.
3, right? So as it becomes 2 mini pools or 4 mini pools ultimately.
Yeah, so if you go from a solo staker to a 16 ETH mini pool, you have credits to spin up a second validator for free. You don't have to pay for the bond. If you go from 32 down to 8, you get 3 more mini pools and credits. You have to have the RPL staked to support them, obviously, but you can still create these new validators without having to pay the Ether portion of the bond.
Right. that was a lot, and thank you for explaining that. So
yeah.
the question the YouTuber actually, a YouTube person here actually had was, is it still worth running hybrid mode? I think that's more of a hash support question on Discord. There's pros and cons to this either way. There's something to be said for it's working now. There's also something to be said for everything's in the smart node stack and you don't have to maintain two different things.
Yeah, that's definitely a personal choice and probably not something we're going to be able to cover in the narrow time that we have.
No, we won't. Okay,
yeah.
Which gets us to the second. You mentioned, right, when we had withdrawal calls about how people can now set an Ethereum address like a Ledger or a multisig or, whatever, and get their money. Somebody says, how do I confirm that my withdrawal addresses are set up correctly for skimming so I can receive my execution rewards? So that gets a little bit into what is a withdrawal address in a rocket pool environment, because that's not the same as a validated withdrawal address.
Yeah, and so how do you verify? I'm assuming they're asking how do you verify after the fact once you've submitted it and not beforehand, because beforehand
I think we're talking about a mini pool. Like for a mini pool, what does this look like?
So for a mini pool, there's two stages, I should say. The first stage is your validator on the beacon chain is going to have withdrawal credentials or a withdrawal address, which points to an address on the execution layer. And the address it should point to is the mini pool address, because the mini pool is a contract on the execution layer, right? That's normal.
So that's already set. There's no change to be made there. Nothing changed with Chapella.
Right. If you made a mini pool using Rocket Pool, that's already been set. It's been set since day one, since we launched. Right. Solo staker migration is a different story, but yeah, it's, besides that. The second thing is once that, so the beacon chain is going to skim your rewards and put them into the mini pool contract. And then you need to be able to access those rewards, which I think is what they're asking about.
Right.
So in the smart node, there's a command to allow you to distribute the balance of a mini pool, which is what we're talking about here. Distributing means splitting it evenly between yourself, the node operator, and the pool stakers. It splits the balance in half minus the commission. That gets sent to your node's withdrawal address. And so when you created your node, one of the things you had to do was set up a withdrawal address. By default, it's the node itself, but we don't recommend keeping that long term. We recommend making that more secure, like a hardware wallet or something else that's cold storage, basically. And when you run the distribute command, it sends your portion of the mini pool's balance over to that withdrawal address for your node.
Right. So, basically, if I have a mini pool, I don't have to worry about on-chain withdrawal addresses. That's already set. The only thing I should do is go get a hardware wallet if I don't really have one, go into the smart node stack and say, set my personal withdrawal address to this hardware wallet. And that's where the stack will then send my stuff.
Yeah. Okay,
great. Wonderful. I am going to briefly harp on this thing here. Oh, there's even more that we need to do. So I'm going to be very brief.
Okay.
But just to point this out again, we have another really large pool who just said, hey, we had a bunch of validators behind a multisig and we totally would never have rugged you, and they are now on a proper withdrawal address. That is not a thing for Rocket Pool. You guys very deliberately didn't launch until you could set withdrawal addresses and no multisigs had control of funds. Correct?
I mean, that's true. Is that a question?
No, just pointing that out, right?
Yeah, so we specifically did not launch the protocol until the ability to set an execution layer address as the withdrawal credentials was added to the beacon chain spec. Yeah.
Right. That was, April.
That's a really fun part of history too, because that was something that Rocket Pool developed and urged the core developers to accept. And there was a lot of going back and forth about it. And finally, it was implemented by the core protocol. And now it is the standard that everyone is going to. So
that is fun, isn't it? Yeah.
A funny part of history.
Fun. Okay, so I don't know, Nix, you have a number of questions here that you want to ask. What are you going to go for?
Yeah, this is rapidly becoming AMA. Oh boy.
There are other upgrades in this, in Atlas upgrade, right? Do you guys want to talk about those at all? I think mini pool queue and the protocol efficiency.
Yeah, so I covered a lot of them as like quality of life changes very early on into this whole thing, because I know we didn't have time to cover all the details. So mini pool queues, well, yeah, with like 9 minutes left, let's do that. The mini pool queue thing. So one of the interesting situations that arose very early on in the protocol's life was there was way higher demand for node operators than there was for actual liquid staking in the pool. And so we would have this queue of people waiting for liquid staking Ether to come in to spin up their validators. And it would be like 100 people. Like there would be 100 mini pools just sitting in the queue waiting for Ether to come in. And that's a lot of Ether that's just sitting idle in the protocol, not doing anything. It's not on the beacon chain. It's not being actively put to work. It's not earning APR, and that's bad. So Atlas changes the queue a little bit in a way where now, as a node operator, when you put your deposit down for a mini pool, you can actually fire off mini pools that are already in the queue waiting. It basically takes your bond and puts it to work by spinning up one of the validators that was earlier on in the queue. So there's less of this whole like dead band of Ether waiting to be put to work, essentially. And at the same time, it means that people can start making their mini pools faster if there are a lot of them, which we are expecting there may be with the shift to LEB8s and stuff. So it just means that there's less sort of like idle Ether in the protocol and people can get to work faster.
Wonderful. Who's audited the new Atlas code, and how did those audits go?
Audits are something that we take very seriously, which is why we don't push anything for like a year between updates or whatever. Sigma Prime and Consensus Diligence are the two main firms that audited the code. Consensus came back like twice to take a look at some stuff as we adjusted things once we put it on the Gorilla testnets and got some feedback from users. But they were both very thorough in their reports. The reports are publicly available. I think it's rocketpool.net/security, I want to say, something like that, but they're all available online. Mav, correct me if I'm wrong there.
Yeah, it's on the homepage. There's a hash link or something, but if you scroll down, there's a security section or Control F security. They're right there, easy to spot.
All right, thanks for playing 20 questions. I think we're through. Nix, anything else?
I don't have any other questions. If anybody in trading or the YouTube chat has any questions, they should throw them in really quickly.
Another
Looking
one,
through.
you got a POAP, right?
We do have a POAP to give. I think that it was just dropped into the YouTube chat.
Nice.
Can't we just run it for one more hour? And I mean, it's going so well.
I mean, we're all just back channeling and trading.
Pretty much.
No, I got no more questions. Medica, how much does this POAP cost?
$50.
Cool.
And I know everyone always wants to know, and I'm trying to support that. Where does the dollar go?
I believe the dollar formally goes to poap.estaker.eth, and those funds are tentatively earmarked for being put to public goods, and then also to sort of fund the EthStaker community as a whole.
Okay, so and I'm okay, honestly. I'm okay saying EthStaker is getting those funds. I just think it's important whenever, like, it's a dollar, it is a Sybil or spam resistance mechanism. I'm okay that we're getting it. I always want to make sure that people know that in advance. Like, it's not going to. I was gonna like say something like people would not want to contribute to, but we're okay. Maybe.
Yep.
I mean, EthStaker uses all these funds to put on live streams to create educational materials. We don't get rich from this. This is not something that is profitable in any way.
Are you not reading Reddit? Come on.
He's getting rich from the ODAO, which is why it's showing so much.
All right, let's wrap this up. Does anybody else have anything they want to mention, talk about for the Atlas upgrades? Any other questions? Did anybody look through the YouTube chat? Great, we're super excited about this to come out. I'm looking forward to seeing how many 16 ETH mini pools transfer to 8 ETH mini pools, especially with that higher RPL requirement. I'm not going to ask more questions.
Well, I may have a last comment there. So higher RPL requirement. Anybody who came in early and made a mini pool because they can't come out until it's at 150% of bond, they're probably above 30% RPL bond at this point, and 30% is what you need to convert to an LEB8. So for a lot of people, this is just a plain APY upgrade without any additional RPL needed for a bunch of node operators. Not all, but everybody who's been in for a while, that's true.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm above 150% and have been for a few months.
I have not even skimmed, right? So you could skim first and then convert, or just convert it all, whatever you want to do, you know?
It's funny how many strategies there are. Like, you know, do I stay over 150% and hold RPL, or do I sell the RPL and launch more mini pools? It can all be very complex to.
That's interesting. My strategy has always been, what is the laziest thing that I can do?
So, you know, that into hash trading we go to talk about that. All right, thanks.
Cool. Thank you guys for coming. Thank you everybody for coming. We're gonna shut down the stream now. Rockpool, you guys can stay on for a few minutes. Thanks everybody for watching.
Thank you. Bye everyone. Thank you.
Bye.